I'm talking today with our Greypath DVD and competition reviewer, Betty Lewis, and Betty was an air hostess with TAA in the, I don't know, 50s or 60s, somewhere about that time, and I'm very happy to have her here and ask a few questions about those days, which I think will be of interest. Betty Lewis, and our first question is for you. What years did you fly?
Oh, I joined TA in, towards the end of 1957 and flew 58, all of 59 and almost all of 1960, which was quite a long time in those days because most girls only lasted about 12 or 18 months.
Is it easy to get a job with TA in those days?
Well, I think it was, but there were certain qualifications you had to meet before you applied to the company. Like you weren't to be shorter than 5'3", you weren't to be younger than 21, needed an attractive appearance, and also you had to have nursing experience or a first aid certificate. And then if you're accepted by the company, you went into a hostess school for 2 weeks, and then you were on probation for 3 months.
Well, I pulled up an image that you supplied me, the poster in those days, and it looks pretty nice. And it does epitomise what you say about glamour. So we'll just remove that and continue. The next question would be then, how long did you fly and why did you cease flying?
Well, I flew for almost the 4 years and I resigned because I was being married. And the ruling was in those days, if you were being married, you had to resign. Not like these days where a lot of the girls are married. In fact, I've even seen girls pregnant walking up and down the aircraft cabins.
I've not seen that myself. I don't know whether it's good or bad. You in agreement? You agree?
I don't know whether it's a good thing or not.
What sort of aircraft did you fly?
Well, I was based in Queensland for 12 months, so it was mostly DC-3s up there. And then when I was posted back to Melbourne, it was Viscounts, DC-4s, Convairs.
So there's the DC-3, and I think if we swing over, we might be able to find the Viscount. We didn't have a photograph of the DC-4, did we?
No.
What was your favourite?
Oh, I don't know that I had a favourite. Of course, the Fokker Friendships came in, which eventually replaced the DC-3s, and there were other aircraft at times that were on loan to the company for various reasons.
With any friends from those days?
I have only a few good friends from those days, but unfortunately with moving the States because of my husband's work, you do tend to lose touch with people, which is a shame.
Aren't there some hostess organisations and things that people work with?
Well, there is an Air Hostess Association. TA have Wings Away, ANSET was down to earth, but I was only a member for a short time of the TA Association.
Yeah. What was that?
Well, just moving around often made it difficult to attend meetings, and I didn't always know all the girls that had attended these meetings. I seemed to fly at a different period from when a lot of the girls were attending these meetings.
Yeah. The uniforms, they always used to be terrific. I mean, what were the regulations like for dress and behaviour?
Well, I think the regulations were pretty strict in those days. We had white uniforms for summer, and you of course had to have a full-length slip so the sun wouldn't shine through and show your legs if you're on ground duty. Navy blue uniform for winter. The cap always had to sit at the right angle on your head, which was about an inch above the right eyebrow. Hair had to be short, well combed back, good makeup, plain navy blue shoes with low heels, stockings with seams, no pantyhose in those days.
Mm.
And you had to check that your seams were always straight up the back of your leg. You'd be regularly checked, and if they felt that you weren't up to standard, you'd be called into the hostess supervisor's office and given a bit of a talking to. A certain standard of behaviour was expected from you because you were representing the company and you were thought of as the face of TAA.
Mm. You got a bit of PR, I noticed, from some of these older photographs. I'm playing up a photograph here now of you handing out brochures or something or other in those days.
I remember that one. That was a flight that was going through to Tahiti with a load of newspapers with all the news from Australia, and I was rostered on for duty on that day, so I was the lucky hostess that got to be out on the tarmac when they came and took off.
It's a long time from then till now, isn't it?
Sure is.
Points to be time to ask you though.
No,
What were the high
yet.
points and low points?
The high points, I think, were probably the travelling that you did all around Australia, some extremely interesting people that you met, and also, of course, the companionship of all the other girls, and there was a lot of fun at times. The low points, can't remember many low points, but your social life did suffer because you were away a lot, and also getting out of bed really early, like 4 o'clock in the morning, was never any fun. But if you did have an early flight, TA would often send a car to collect you, and of course there was many a time when the girls were still tucked up in bed sound asleep, and to miss your flight was about the biggest sin you could commit.
What about flying in the Gulf country? It was much rougher for people in those days.
Yes, it was, because we mostly flew DC-3s out the Gulf country and the Channel country in Queensland, and because the aircraft were not pressurised, it meant we flew reasonably low, therefore it made for some very bumpy trips. A lot of people were airsick, didn't always make their sick bag, and often we would go out for 3 or 4 days at a time, and a lot of the food that we would need would be loaded on bulk, and we would have to make up the meals. I also remember some of the accommodation we stayed in was quite primitive compared to today's standards, and I particularly remember the brown, smelly bore water that we had to shower in. Often too, out in the Channel and Gulf country, there would be bags of mail for some of the properties out that way, and with no airstrips to land on, the aircraft would circle until they got down to a reasonable height, and then the first officer would come down to the back, open the door, and just kick or throw the bags out. We would just stand at the back of the aircraft, just watching, leaning on the seats. Gosh, can you imagine that being allowed today with no harness or anything holding you in?
Was the job as glamorous as it seems?
I don't know that we ever thought of it as being glamorous, although we did have several girls that were entered into the Miss Australia quest in those days. And of course, as I just talked about flying out Western Queensland, that certainly wasn't considered glamorous when you did those. There was a certain amount of prestige being in this position, and you always felt special that you had been chosen to be a TA hostess, and in those days it was just a lovely career.
That's pretty well covered, I think, and I mean, in retrospect it sounds like it was pretty good. But is there anything you'd like to add? Do I haven't asked any?
Well, I think TA was fairly innovative in some of the things that they did introduce at times. On the long hauls to Perth, we often had soup out of big silver tureens and sherry that we served, and then they tried at one stage champagne on the late night flights from Brisbane and Sydney back to Melbourne. I feel really sorry that TA is no more, likewise Ansett. But there is a TA museum out in York Street, Essendon, which is open 3 days a week. I think it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from about 10 till 3, and you're welcome to pop out there and have a good dose of nostalgia for those days when flying was a lot easier.
If you can fit into your uniform, you no doubt keep it, but if you can't, are you thinking of giving it to the museum?
I might. I've spoken about it to my daughter, and she said she's not interested in having that uniform, so, you know, give it to the museum or sell it or something like that.
Well, Bet, thanks very much for coming in. It was nice talking with you. We value your contribution to Greypath, and I'm sure it's interesting for a lot of people to hear about your past.